successfully summiting Mount Kilimanjaro and a few weeks of recovery, I want to use this video to talk about how to prepare for trekking up Kilimanjaro. I hope you enjoyed watching my little mini documentary about trekking up Kilimanjaro. It was actually the first of this kind of videos I've ever done. A lot of questions are actually being answered in this documentary about what it is like to trek up Kilimanjaro. But in this video, I want to talk about all the questions you have beforehand. When we talk about the weather, of course, we need to bear in mind that we're talking about a really high mountain. The weather in the mountains is really hard to predict, so you should always come prepared. In matters of Kilimanjaro, this could mean that you have minus 20 degrees Celsius at the summit, while you have about plus 30 degrees Celsius down in Moshi. The weather is unpredictable and changes quick, but also here we have seasons. It is not as much summer and winter season as we know it from Europe and North America. It is more the wet and the dry season because of the proximity to the equator. Therefore, the best time to go is actually in the dry season from August till October. This is when you have the lowest rainfall and you have less clouds. However, this is also the time when it is most crowded. We were there in September and you could see that there are a lot of people hiking up the mountain, but because we were choosing the longer route, it was actually more relaxed. But even though we were going in September, we were not really lucky with our summit day because we were hiking into the clouds on that day, while we could see the mountain totally free of clouds all the other days. The time you should avoid is of course the rainy season, because bad weather drains your energy and therefore the summit success rate during that time is way lower. The rainy season lasts from March till May, and also November is not a good month to do it because in all these months you have high rainfall, but of course you have less crowds. If you want to avoid the crowds, you can do it in the rainy season and maybe you are lucky and have good weather. Or you go in the shoulder season, which is in July and December until the 20th of December, because then there are the holidays. But if you do it before, as well as from January to February, you have the chances of getting good weather and having less crowds. When we talk routes, the general rule is the longer the route, the better the acclimatization. If you take a longer route, then your body has more time to adjust to the high altitude and you increase therefore your chances of reaching the summit. So it is a once in a lifetime experience. Don't rush it. It's a marathon, not a sprint. When you take a longer route, this also means you have way more time to take pictures, and the longer routes, like in my case Lemosho route, but also the Mashame route, are way more picturesque than the other ones, because on the Lemosho route, for example, you approach, and also on the Mashame, you approach the mountain from the west side. So you come up to Shira Peak, where you have a beautiful valley below. You go over to the lava tower and then to the impressive Barranco wall until you go up into the alpine desert and go up finally to the summit. With that you have a lot of diversity in matters of taking pictures and the landscape. So I highly recommend taking the longer route. If you're not into camping at all, your only chance is to take the Marango route, which is super short and therefore it's really hard to acclimatize on that route. However, those huts are not really luxurious. You're staying basically in huge dorms with a lot of people. So I highly recommend taking a longer route. Camping, and the camps are actually super picturesque. So for me it was always worth it to get up early for the sunrise, because the whole setting is just super picturesque with all the colorful tents pitched in front of this impressive mountain. The next really important topic is choosing the right company. As we're talking here about a national park, you're only allowed to go with registered guide and trekking companies. And the national park fees you're looking into make up almost half of the money you pay for a tour. So here we're talking about $800 to $1,000 depending on the duration of your tour, and they're always included in the tour prices. So the question you should ask yourself before going with the tour operator is, do they pay fair wages? Do they have good equipment? And how much experience do they have? You can find those information if you look online, for example, in reviews of others. But the general rule of thumb is that you shouldn't book a tour below $2,000 because this means that the money is saved elsewhere, for example, for wages or equipment, or maybe both even. So my recommendation would be to go for the mid-tier price range between $2,000 and $3,500, depending on which route you choose, and to go with local tour operators. I went with G Adventures because I'm one of their brand ambassadors, and the tours for Kilimanjaro at G Adventures start at about $2,500. They have often sales where you can actually get it for up to 20% cheaper, so it's always worth looking into that. I put some links in the description box down below. What G does is that they only use local employees and suppliers, and they also have really good and up-to-date equipment. So for example, our tents were brand new and they renew the equipment every few months. And what was also interesting is to see the footwear our porters had. They all had proper hiking boots, while when we were looking at other tour operators, some of the porters, they were wearing only sneakers. So it's really worth looking into how the tour operator you're choosing is treating their employees and which equipment they have. Another tip would be to opt in for having your own toilets. This is a decision which you usually make when you're with your tour group on the day before you start a hike, because this costs extra money. But it's definitely worth investing that money because the toilet situation in the camps is something else. For Tanzania, you need a visa, which you can get in most cases on arrival. So, for example, for Europe and North American citizens in general, you can actually get a visa once you arrive. This is how I did it. But it is always better to check with your Ministry of Foreign Affairs if you need to apply for a visa beforehand or not. Next topic is insurance. Actually, you need to have a proper insurance in order to go on a tour with most companies. So in general, I highly recommend getting a good health insurance because here we're talking about active travel. You're in a foreign country, you're on a mountain where things can happen all the time. It's always best to get a travel insurance. I use World Nomads, and I put a link down in the description box below. And I found this to be the perfect fit for most of my travels, especially when I'm going into the outdoors. In matters of vaccination, it's always a good idea to have yellow fever protection. And everything beyond that, I also recommend you to check the latest status online with your Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A big topic when talking about Mount Kilimanjaro is of course high altitude sickness, and we addressed actually this topic in the documentary. We have an own segment only about high altitude sickness, but to sum up things really quickly, it is actually something which everybody can get, no matter how old you are, how fit you are, or how experienced you are. If you're not living in the mountains at an altitude of more than 3,000 meters, your chances are high to have syndromes of high altitude sickness, but they can vary. So you can have stronger syndromes or weaker syndromes of high altitude sickness, but the chances are that you get a certain distinct of high altitude sickness. Good tour operators, like in my case G Adventures, they will always check with you. Like we had every day our blood oxygen levels checked and our pulse rate, and also the guides, they were really experienced, so they can tell if somebody's not feeling well. High altitude sickness can actually be life-threatening. So most of the cases where people died on the mountain are actually related to high altitude sickness, so it's always a good idea to tell your guides how you're feeling. There are, however, pills for high altitude like Diamox, which might help, but our guides actually advised us not to take those pills because the effects are not as big, and the downside is that you need to pee a lot, which means your body loses a lot of water, and you need to drink a lot of water in order to help you cope with the altitude. So this can have actually negative effects as well. So my tip therefore is to take headache pills with you. I had ibuprofen with me as a standby medicine, and of course to do a lot of training in advance in the months leading up to the trip. I'm doing regular workout sessions, which means I'm running every week about 2 or 3 times a week. But in the month leading up to the trip, like the last 6 months before my trekking adventure in Kilimanjaro, I decided to increase the intensity of my training. So I was running 10 kilometers every second day, and with that I wanted to not only strengthen my body but also wanted to work on my endurance. I also decided to quit alcohol for this time and to change my diet to a more healthy diet to boost my immune system, and this way to not take any chances to not make it to the top at the end. And overall, I'm really glad that I took all these steps, because as you've seen in the documentary, I had problems with high altitude sickness, and the only reason why I could make it to the top is actually that my body was strong enough to do so, because I had this workout program, I changed my diet, and therefore my body had all the strength needed to make this final push. And this would also be my recommendation for you, to really train your body in, let's say, the last 6 months leading up to the trip, in order to be able to make it. When we talk about Tanzania, of course, we need to talk about malaria, because Tanzania is actually in a high risk zone of malaria. However, when we're talking about Kilimanjaro, you're most of the time on an altitude level above 1,500 meters, and at that altitude there are no mosquitoes. So it highly depends on your own travel plans. For example, if you do a safari before you do a trek, or if you do a safari afterwards. So I highly recommend you to consult a doctor a few weeks in advance to talk about your travel plans and the season when you're going there, to determine which medicine you need. If you need to take malaria medicine beforehand, or if you just have it with you as a standby medicine. So in my case, I went in a season where you don't have a high risk of malaria in the area where I went to, and I was only flying in for the trek. So my doctor advised me to only take Malarone as the standby medicine with me, because what you need to bear in mind as well is that those pills, like Malarone for example, they can affect you, and with that maybe decrease your chances of making it to the summit. Gear and equipment is another really big topic, therefore I have a whole video which I will be making about my whole packing list for this trip. But I wanted to use the chance here to point out the most important items I had with me. Starting with water. We're talking about water already when we're talking about the high altitude sickness, so it's really important to have something with you to carry about 3 liters. So I had this bottle here, and I had another additional camelback which could hold about 2.5 liters. This one had about 1 liter. Then of course, having proper hiking boots are really essential. I also decided to have poles this time for like the final push to the summit. Those were really helpful. Then of course the sleeping bag, which goes up to -10 degrees Celsius, as well as a waterproof duffel bag. This is what I gave to my porter to carry it up, and this way everything stayed dry, because you never know when it starts raining. So everything, all my clothes were dry. Then a waterproof day pack, because in my case on the summit day we had to deal with snow, and on the final day when we went out of the park it was pouring when we went through the rainforest area. So it's a good idea to have a waterproof day pack in order to protect your electronics like a camera. Another really good thing to have with you is Vaseline for your lips, as well as sunscreen, as the sun is really strong up on this high altitude. And last but not least, you should always layer up. So have long underwear with you and then have many layers. More of that in the next video. Every trekking tour which goes up to Kilimanjaro usually starts in the area around Moshi. So you will fly into Kilimanjaro International Airport, which is located between Arusha and Moshi. And from there you should organize a private transfer or private pickup with the tour operator you are going to trek up Kilimanjaro. In matters of accommodation, I stayed at the Stella Maris Lodge in Moshi and at the Bristol Cottages, and I can actually recommend both of them. Finally, let's talk about money and tipping. Actually, the tips you are handing out at the end of your trek are probably your biggest expense. This always depends on your experience with your tour, but the general rule would be to have 10% of the tour price with you as tips you can hand out to the porters and the guides. Of course, you can always choose to give less or to give more. In my case, for example, I also decided to give part of my equipment I had with me to the porter, which was helping me personally to get up the mountain, because I had all my camera equipment with me and he was actually carrying my bag for the last part in order to reach the summit. So I decided to give him my gaiters. Apart from the tips, you don't really need much more money, because actually in your tour usually everything is included. Like for G Adventures, for example, even the hotel before and afterwards, the hotel stays were included in the tour price, as well as all the meals you have on the mountain. Only the meals you have before and afterwards, as well as the transfer to get to the airport, are not included. I brought US dollars with me because dollars are widely accepted there. Of course, you also have the chance to withdraw money at local banks, but then it is a good idea to make sure with your bank that your credit card works and doesn't get blocked immediately if you try to withdraw money at a local bank. Alright, that's it. I hope this video helps you in order to prepare for your own Kilimanjaro trekking adventure. If you want to know more about trekking up Kilimanjaro, I highly recommend watching my documentary if you haven't already done so, and to head over to my blog where I wrote down a lot of information and guides on how to trek up Kilimanjaro. I have a packing list there, and I will also produce a packing list video for Kilimanjaro next week. So make sure to subscribe to this channel for new travel videos every Thursday, and I see you on the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.